Hello, beautiful people of the internet. How are you doing today? My name is Jackie and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I am going to be talking about my June wrap-up. In the month of June, I read 7 books, 4 of which had murder in the title. That was not on purpose, but that totaled 1,985 pages. My average star rating for the month was 3.66. I think that's pretty much it, so let's just dive into all of the books that I read in the month of June 2023. First, I read a book that was not featured on my June TBR, and that was Murder 1, A Writer's Guide to Homicide by Mauro V. Corvace and Joseph R. Paglino. I did not rate this book. Basically, I just bought this because I am an aspiring murder mystery author. I am currently in the final round of editing for my historical mystery manuscript, Project Mayfair. The 2 men who wrote this book are both former investigators, and so in this book they talk about all the different kinds of murders, crimes of passion, family murders, serial killers, etc., talking about some common characteristics between these types of killers, the weapons they commonly use, different ways they can be caught. Basically all with the purpose to help aspiring murder mystery writers out there accurately write about murder in their books. I did think there was useful information in here. The book did focus a little heavily on mob or organized crime murders. In my opinion, that's just not something I personally ever see myself writing about, so I was not as interested in those parts. I will also say this book was written in the 1990s, and there are some instances where you can definitely tell because the language they use to refer to transgender people, it is the language that was commonly used at that time period, but nowadays is not the language the community prefers. So just a heads up, this was written in the 90s and it definitely reflects the ideals of that time period in some instances. But if you're writing a police procedural, a book about a serial killer, etc., and you want to learn a little more about investigative techniques, criminal profiling, and the different types of people that often commit murder, there is some handy information in here that could potentially help you in your writing journey. Next, I read Murder in Old Bombay by Neve March. I decided to give this book 4 stars. This is the first book in the Captain Jim and Lady Diana mysteries set in historical Bombay, India. Our main character, Captain Jim Aganotri, has recently left the British Army after an injury. Jim has grown up being half white and half Indian, not knowing who his biological father is and his mother having died shortly after his birth, so he's never really quite felt like he fits in. One thing he really does love, though, is Sherlock Holmes, and when he reads a newspaper article about 2 young women who supposedly jumped to their deaths from the clock tower, he's intrigued by the case, especially since one of the dead women's husbands is saying there's absolutely no way she would have killed herself. So now, in need of a new job, Captain Jim decides that he's going to use some of his Sherlock Holmes-like investigative skills to find out what really happened to these 2 women. The dead woman's husband ends up hiring him to look into the case and get to the bottom of it, and through his investigation, Captain Jim develops an affection for Lady Diana, who is the adoptive sister and sister-in-law of the 2 dead women. Like many historical mystery female characters, Diana is very outspoken, very brave, almost the point of being stubborn and reckless at times, and of course, Captain Jim is going to develop romantic feelings for her. Like, we all know how these historical mystery books go at this point, right? I gave this book 4 stars because I did think it was, generally speaking, well written, and I really enjoyed the setting of British colonial India. I felt like it was very well described and just an interesting place to set a story. I do feel like this book has kind of caused me to reflect on a lot of things. And one thing I was wondering after finishing this book is it technically a mystery? Because if you look on Goodreads, this book is classified as historical fiction, mystery, historical mystery, and I don't know if it really is a mystery or not. Obviously, the starting point of this story is Captain Jim hearing about the mysterious deaths of these 2 women and deciding that he is going to solve it. But I don't know if I would say that's really what the book is about. I almost just feel like the murder mystery was the inciting incident, but not the main point of the story. I felt like the point of this book was to explore Captain Jim as a character and also some of the different politics and events going on in Bombay in this period. I don't know if I can call this book a mystery or not, because I feel like in a mystery novel, the mystery has to be the main point of the story. It has to be one of the most important plot details, and I feel like that wasn't the case in this book. Anyways, I don't know if anybody else finds that thought as interesting as I do, but it did cause me to reflect a lot on what does a book have to be qualified as a mystery. To share more of my thoughts on the plot of this book specifically, I do think that these discussions were interesting, but I think this book was too long, and there was a part in the middle where I personally was bored and I was ready to just move on. In her author's note, I believe Neve March said that the original draft for this manuscript was 120,000 words. And for reference, for those of you who are not aspiring mystery authors like me, a mystery novel that you aim to get traditionally published should be around 80,000 words, 90 being that nice sweet spot, and 100 being max, like the maximum length. Debut authors should never submit manuscripts for publication that are over 100,000 words, because that is just way too long. So when I read that the original draft of this book was 120, I was like, oh boy, that was a long draft. And even this finished, edited book was still, I think, pushing 400 pages, which for a mystery is very long. I feel like maybe she had a lot of ideas, and it would have been better to save some of those ideas for a future book, just to keep the plot in this one neater and concise. There was a reference to Captain Jim's biological father that went absolutely nowhere, and I was really baffled that Jim did not follow up on that piece of information, because you would think if somebody has wondered their whole life who their father is, and then they get information potentially leading them to their father, they would actually want to pursue that, or at least think about it, but that didn't happen, so that was very weird. I kind of wonder if maybe she meant to edit that part out, but it somehow got published anyway? I don't know. And quite frequently, the book is telling us about how amazingly intelligent and clever Diana is. And she is a very educated woman, which I liked about her, but I never felt like she did anything that, in my opinion, was particularly clever to warrant those descriptions of her. You know, if the author wanted to sell me this idea of her being this extraordinary woman, I feel like there need to be more examples of her doing something particularly clever. And personally, I think I would have liked Diana more if this book was told in dual perspectives from both her and Jim. I think I could have bought her character a little more if I actually got to witness her doing her sleuthing and going out to get this information. Because there are no chapters told from her perspective, When she does something, we just hear about it later as she is recounting to Jim or her family what she's done. And I think maybe if I actually saw her skills in action, I would have liked her as the heroine more and would have had a higher opinion about her cleverness and intellect. That being said, I'm definitely interested in potentially checking out the sequel to this book and seeing where the author is going to go next, what's going to happen next with Jim and Diana, and what other events she will focus on in future books. Next, I read Washington Square by Henry James. I gave this book 4 stars. This is a very short classic novel following Catherine Sloper. Catherine is a very shy young woman. Her father, Dr. Sloper, is extremely controlling and belittling towards his daughter. So when this young man named Morris Townsend comes to New York high society and takes an interest in Catherine, Dr. Sloper is convinced that Morris is a fortune hunter who just wants Catherine's money, and he is willing to do whatever it takes to prove to his daughter that Morris is no good. I read this book with my father because years ago we read Daisy Miller by Henry James together for a school project I had to do, and Daisy Miller and Washington Square are here together in our Barnes & Noble Classics edition. So he suggested to me, why don't we read Washington Square together too? I just want to say to my father, thank you for not being like Dr. Sloper, because he is one of the meanest fathers I personally have ever read about in literature. And I'm just glad my dad's not like him, because he sucked. I personally had a ton of affection for Catherine. You know, Henry James tells us she's not particularly beautiful, she's not smart, she's not witty, she is very meek in many ways, but I sympathize with her so much. One, because I also get so anxious in social situations, so I can relate to that. And secondly, I think the reason that she's so meek is because her father has belittled her for so long and clearly has such a low opinion of his child that when a man expresses romantic interest in her, he's convinced that it just must be for her money, because he can't fathom why any man would be romantically interested in Catherine just for herself. You know, she's really a victim of an abusive parent. He's not physically abusive, but in terms of emotional abuse, yeah, it's an incredibly emotionally abusive relationship that she's experiencing. Now, when I read the Goodreads reviews for this book, I saw many people say 100% Morris was a fortune hunter, and that is not how my father and I interpreted this book. The way I interpreted it is I believe it's meant to be ambiguous about what his motivations are, and at the end of the story, I'm still not quite sure. There are some moments that make me believe he does genuinely love Catherine, and other moments that makes me believe Dr. Sloper is right and he is after her for her money. I think intentionally Henry James was keeping it ambiguous, but that's just how I interpreted it. All in all, I really quite enjoyed Washington Square. It was not long at all, and I think the writing style was pretty easy to understand, so if you're looking for a short classic, I would recommend this one. There were also moments that really reminded me of Jane Austen. There are some characters in this who remind me of the character archetypes you might see in a Jane Austen novel, and sometimes the narrator pokes fun at them in the way that Jane Austen frequently does. I saw somebody on Goodreads say that Washington Square is like Jane Austen, but more depressing. And I think that is a good way to describe it. It has sort of the same tone as a Jane Austen novel, but not as happy an ending. I really wish that I could take Catherine Sloper and transplant her into a Jane Austen novel so things would work out better for her. I really just had a lot of affection for her as a main character, and I feel bad for everything she had to endure. I really liked this book though, honestly, more than I thought I would, so maybe check it out if it sounds interesting to you. The next book I want to talk about is Elizabeth and Leicester, Power, Passion, Politics by Sarah Gristwood. This was another 4-star for me. This is a historical nonfiction book about Queen Elizabeth I of England and her longtime favorite, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. It is basically a dual biography of these two historical figures, talking about their lives, their achievements, and their very complicated relationship. Queen Elizabeth I is famously known as the Virgin Queen, but many historians debate about whether or not she actually was a virgin, and did she never want to get married, or did she seriously consider it? The relationship she had with Robert Dudley has long been debated and also been the subject of popular imagination. There are lots of people who are convinced that these two were in love. I mean, there's people on the internet writing historical fix-it fan fiction about them, where the two of them actually ended up together. And when I was a child obsessed with Tudor-era England, I gotta admit, I shipped these two really hard. I was convinced that they were soulmates who were just ripped apart by tragic circumstances. And now as an adult, I still firmly believe that their relationship was not entirely platonic, but I also now realistically recognize that there really wasn't ever going to be a happy ending for these two. It never would have worked out, and I don't think Elizabeth ever seriously considered Robert as a potential husband. There were several instances in this book where I felt like she treated him pretty badly, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised because she was the daughter of Henry VIII. So of course she had some of that Tudor temperament for sure. As someone who grew up loving Robert and Elizabeth, this was an enjoyable book to read. I think it was a fair, nuanced portrait that did discuss the strengths and flaws of both of them as people. And even though I don't think the two of them ever could have worked out, there is something so tragically romantic about Elizabeth keeping the last letter Robert ever wrote to her by her bed until the day she died. If that doesn't scream, I love you, I don't know what does. Oh, and next I read The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I have been wanting to read this book for years now, and it was on my 5-star predictions list. I did not end up giving it 5 stars, but I did give it 4 stars, so I did still really like it. This book is the first in a series, and it follows a group of elderly people at a British retirement village. They form a group called the Thursday Murder Club, where they get together every week to talk about unsolved murder cases. So when someone close to them actually is murdered, naturally they decide that they're going to work together and try to solve it. Now, did I think the murder mystery plotline in this book was shocking? No, I pretty much figured out where the storyline was going, so I wasn't really surprised by whodunit in the end. Also, spoiler, the cover art of this book is a fox. And I think that's kind of a hint. Don't you? If you read the book and you know what I mean, doesn't that kind of give something away? Anyways, and spoilers. So, was the murder mystery plotline in this book shocking, outstanding, I never saw it coming? No. But what I really enjoyed about this book was the characters and their charm. This book's not laugh out loud funny, but there are many just clever or charming moments. I smiled a lot while I was reading it, and the characters, they meddle into things they shouldn't be meddling into. But I can't be mad at them because they're just like such charming characters that even though I know they shouldn't be doing this, I can't help but like them anyway. this was just a delightful little book, perfect for people who love British murder mysteries. And I've heard the series gets even better, so I can't wait to read the next book. And next I read Stay Awake by Megan Golden. I gave this book 3 stars, and ultimately I think I'm not going to read from Megan Golden again. This is my 3rd book that I've read from her, and I haven't really loved any of them. I gave The Escape Room 3 stars, I think. The Night Swim, 2 stars. Hot take, I did not enjoy that book, and I saw the murderer of Jenny, I think her name was. I saw that coming a mile away. Like, the second that character was introduced, I knew they were the murderer. And then with this book, there were things I liked about it, but also a lot of things I didn't like, and I think I just need to accept that Megan Golden is not the author for me. Nothing personal. If she's your favorite author, I'm happy for you. She's just not my cup of tea, I think. So Stay Awake has an absolutely brilliant concept. Our main character, Liv, wakes up one night in the back of a taxi, and she discovers that 2 years have passed. 2 years which she has no memory of. Her apartment is no longer her apartment. She can't get into contact with her boyfriend. And additionally, she finds a bloody knife in her pocket, and she has no idea how this bloody knife got there. Written all over her hands are the words, "Stay awake." Liv finds out that every time she falls asleep, she loses her memory, and now she is being framed for a murder she does not remember committing. The concept of this book is so intriguing, and I have to say, I was very interested in seeing what was going to happen next in this book. I stayed up quite late on a work night because I wanted to finish it. But I did have problems with this book. I really did not connect with Liv as the main character. There were also things in this book that, in my opinion, did not make sense. Like, I don't understand why the person who is framing Liv didn't kill her. Because, like, I think it would have been easier for them to get away with this if they'd killed her too. I don't understand why they decided to frame her when they could have just killed her and probably been more successful at achieving their evil plan. There were also several plot lines in this book that did not go anywhere and did not get any resolution. Obviously, they were intended as red herrings to lead me, the reader, down on a false path. And that's important. A mystery should have red herrings, but your red herring should also be resolved, and that didn't happen here. I'm gonna just make up a fake example here to kind of illustrate what I mean by this. Let's just say you're reading a murder mystery book and Sally is murdered. Now, let's say Steve is not the murderer, but the author wants to make you think that Steve might have killed Sally as a red herring. Perhaps the author tells you that Sally owed Steve a bunch of money that she never paid him back. That gives him a motive to potentially kill her because he was set to inherit money if she died. That makes total sense as a red herring. Now, you should, though, have a moment where this plot line is resolved and we, the reader, can officially dismiss Steve from suspicion. Like, if the detective finds out, oh, Steve had potentially a motive to kill Sally because of this monetary motive, then there should be a scene in the book where the detective goes to talk to Steve about the death of Sally, and then we find out something like, for instance, Steve has a rock-solid alibi. He was physically incapable of committing the murder. Maybe the murder was committed by a right-handed person and Steve is left-handed. Something like that to resolve that storyline and let us know, okay, this is just a red herring. But Megan Golden's red herrings don't have that moment of closure. It would basically be like if the detective said, oh, Steve has a potential motive to kill Sally because of this, and then just never goes to talk to Steve or follows up on it. So that, to me, as a reader, was very frustrating because there were these characters and situations that were clearly introduced as red herrings, but the fictional detectives never follow up on them, and so I kind of just felt like those storylines were dropped and they were a waste of my time. Hopefully you understand what I'm talking about here. A piece of writing advice that I've heard is that all of your suspects should be treated like subplots, and every suspect subplot needs to have its moment of resolution. Megan Golden doesn't resolve her suspect subplots in this book, and that was very frustrating to me. Hopefully you understand what I mean by that, and that fictional example made sense. Yeah, I think I just have to accept that Megan Golden is not the author for me, and her books don't really mesh with my personal tastes, so I don't see myself reading a book by her again in the future. Again, it's nothing personal. I know a lot of people love her books, and if you do, I'm happy for you. That rocks that you found something you enjoy. And lastly, for my Read Christie pick in the month of June, I read Murder in the Mews. This is part of the Hercule Poirot series and is basically 4 novellas. I decided to give this 3 stars. The stories in this collection were Triangle at Rhodes, Murder in the Mews, Dead Man's Mirror, and The Impossible Theft? Is that what it's called? Is it impossible? What's the adjective in the title? The Incredible Theft. I knew it started with an I. And I thought this was enjoyable to read, but I'm just giving it a 3-star because I was not wowed by any of the stories. I'm generally speaking not a huge fan of mystery short stories just because it's usually extremely easy for me to figure out whodunit in a short story, and that was the case here. I did still want to read it though, even though I'm not a short story fan, because I love Agatha Christie, and I don't feel like I wasted my time by reading these by any means. Out of the 4 stories, I think the title story, Murder in the Mews, was my personal favorite. That was really the only one where there was something that happened that genuinely was surprising to me. Like, I kind of knew somebody was suspicious, but when we actually found out what their motivations were, I was surprised by that, so I think that was the highlight of the collection for me. All right, everyone, that is it for my June wrap-up. Let me know in the comments, what did you read in the month of June? Have you read any of the books that I read this month? I would really like to hear your thoughts in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. My social media links are down below if you want to follow me on Tumblr, Instagram, or be my friend on Goodreads. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have an astounding rest of your day. Bye, and I'll see you next time.